Good evening and welcome. I've had a number of folks ask me how to create introductions to songs, or how I come up with my introductions to songs. Every song needs a good arrangement, and a good arrangement needs to have an introduction, a form or plan or outline, and an ending. So each of these categories is a big topic. So I'm just going to talk about introductions now and how to create them and the theory behind how to create them. So I'm going to work from lead sheets of songs I've already talked about on my videos, and I'm going to show you how to create a good introduction. There's various types from simple to complex. So we're going to start with the simplest introduction first and move onward to the more complex. So here we go with introductions to songs. The first introduction I'm going to play for you, and it's the simplest. It's just you're playing an arpeggio on the 5 chord. In other words, let's take the song The Way You Look Tonight. It starts on the 1 chord in the key of E flat. That's the melody, starting on E flat major, then the C minor, F minor, so like that. So how do we set up that first chord? Well, supposing a singer's going to do it and they want just something simple to cue them in, you're going to play the 5 chord as an arpeggio, which is a B flat 7 arpeggio, like this. Now that you're giving them their starting note there. Same thing if it were Misty. Except that Misty has a pickup, but it's the same idea. There's the 1 chord, so it starts on the 5 chord. So that's the simplest one, and we can make that more elaborate by putting a 2 chord in front of the 5. So that's the next category, the 2-5 introduction. Okay, the next step would be the 2-5 into the 1. So it'd be F minor 7 to B flat 7 to E flat, like that. So now the 2-5 could be played rubato style or freestyle like that, or it could be done in tempo, either 2 beats each for each chord, or 2 measures with 1 chord in each measure, like F minor 7, 2, 3, 4, B flat 7 from 1 measure, then your melody here. See, so right now I'm playing more or less ballad style. If you were going to do this in tempo, you might want to have those 2 measures set up like with a tempo like this, 2, 3, 4. Like that. So you have 1 measure of F minor 7, 1 measure of B flat 7. So that's the 2-5. And that's the most common one to use for any song. If it were Misty in another key, it'd be like this. In C, it'd be like... Or The Way You Look Tonight, it could be the same thing. Now I'm creating melodies around those 2 chords rather than just playing the chords, but I'm using the chords as the underlining harmony. And then I can put a melody over it if I want, like something like this maybe. Like that, or maybe something like... Into Just the Way You Look Tonight. So that's the 2-5 introduction. Now we're going to go into some introductions that involve chord progressions. The next category is chord progressions, and the first one I'm going to start out with is the 1-6-2-5. Now in the key of E flat, that'd be E flat major to C minor, the 6th chord, then the 2 chord would be F minor 7, then the 5 chord would be B flat 7. Now that's actually the chord progression for The Way You Look Tonight, so that's a perfect introduction to use for The Way You Look Tonight, particularly if you're going to play it in tempo. You can use 1 measure per chord, or you can have 2 chords in each measure. 2 chords in each measure would be like this. I'd probably do it twice. 1 chord in each measure would be like this. So that'd be a 4-bar introduction with a 1-6-2-5 progression with 1 chord per measure. Now, you don't have to play the melody. It could be something else. You could play something like a... So I make up melodies based on the chord progression. What will work with the chord progression? I try to think of a melody. Here's another one. And then there's your song. Okay, so that's the 1-6-2-5, and that's probably the most common, and you're pretty safe using that one for hundreds and hundreds of songs. It'll always work because it sets up the key. You can hear the key, particularly if the tune is going to start on the 1 chord. You can always use that progression. Now we're going to talk about a variation of that progression where you're going to, the first chord of the song starting on the 2 chord or something other than the 1 chord. Let's take an example of a song that doesn't start on the 1 chord but starts on the 2 chord. And how do we play an introduction for that? So we'll use the song I Get a Kick Out of You, which starts, it's in the key of E flat major, starts on the 2 chord, which is F minor 7. So you have 2, 5, 1, and then it's a 6 actually in dominant form. But we can use that same progression now as an introduction. But we won't play the melody yet. We'll just play something else, like maybe. Now the melody comes in like that. So we played a progression that's a 2, 5, 1, 6, with a 6 being a dominant 7, and I'm using a flat 9 in there to give it a little more tension to pull to the F minor 7 chord, which is the first chord of the measure. So a variation on this might be now to take the 2 to the 5, to the 1, and then a 4 dominant, then a 3 minor 7 to a C7 flat 9 like that. So I've added a couple of more chords in there, makes it a little more sophisticated sounding like this. Like that. Now, instead of going to the 1 chord, you could go to the 3 chord. So you might have this. That's another variation of it. So there's 3 examples now of a progression to take you into the first chord, which is now a 2 chord of the measure. Now, these 2 and various types of progressions I'm showing you can use pedal tones underneath, and that's a completely different sound, and I'm going to show you that next. The use of the pedal tones. A device that's used a lot in jazz is the pedal tone. Was also used in modern music as well as classical music, but the pedal tone in this case is just going to be the B flat. We're in the key of E flat, so it's going to be the 5th step of the scale, which is the 5. And I'm going to play that progression, that 1-6-2-5 progression, against the pedal tone now. On top here with the pedal tone, it means it's being, the pedal tone is suspending it over those measures, and that creates tension that wants to resolve eventually to that first measure. So a little more tension in this progression, this introduction now with the pedal tone like this. You can hear the difference in the sound now. Now I can do different things with the melody up here. I could did this, dee da da. I could do da 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 da. I could go like see, so you want to create melodies against these chords, so otherwise they just sound like chords and there's nothing interesting about them in particular. Now the other progression was the 2-5-1-6. So same thing, pedal tone like this. Right into the tune. Now I can vary that progression, or I can add different melody notes to it, like that. I put the 1-4-3-6 in there on that one. Now I can come off the pedal tone at that point and create some momentum like this. That's a good way to do it. But those 2 progressions now, the 1-6-2-5 and the 2-5-1-6, which is just a different variation of the 1-6-2-5, over those pedal tones, that's used a lot in jazz. You know, often it's not, it doesn't even have to be that progression, but the pedal tone is used like this. Or like just over the 2 chord. Then eventually resolve it to the 5 altered and then to the 1, like that. So that's the pedal tone now. The next category that's popular for introductions is to borrow from the opening phrase of the melody. Now, example would be maybe Foggy Day. I could do something like this for the melody. Notice I'm using the pedal, but now I'm borrowing from the opening phrase of the song. There I'm doing that now. That's very common. The other thing is to use the last phrase of the song, or to borrow from the ending of the song, like maybe Autumn Leaves. We have, remember the last phrase, it would be like this. That's 8 bars, so you might want to use those 8 bars as an introduction like this. So that makes it very clear to the singer or whoever's playing, particularly for singers, where their starting note is, because they can hear the song. Another example might be able to do that on Fly Me to the Moon. So like that's an A minor, and the last phrase it goes to major. So like let's go through it a little bit. So here's our last section. Then you have it turn around into minor, like that. See, so that's a real safe way to bring in a song if people need to hear, particularly a singer needs to hear where that opening melody is, because it starts on the relative minor, and the melody note is actually the 3rd of the relative minor. So how are you going to hear that entrance? And another one is, this another tricky one to get into is the Shadow of Your Smile, which starts like this. So it's in minor key, E minor, relative to G major, but it starts on the 2 chord with that note being a pickup, the 5th of the scale on the pickup. So what I usually do for that song is play a vamp like this. So we're going to talk about vamps now. Another type of introduction that's used a lot in contemporary music and Latin music is the vamp. And that just means it's a repeating pattern, chordal and rhythmic pattern, something like this. That could be the introduction to Shadow of Your Smile, like this. And so on. Or another example would be Jobim's How Insensitive, or any of the Latin tunes, like, so the vamp could be. Or how about even Girl from Ipanema would be a vamp. There's no set way to do the vamp, however you feel it. Could be this. But it's a repeating pattern like that. So that's an important one, and you'll see that used a lot in a lot of the Latin music and contemporary pop music. We've got a hurricane going on over here. Anyway, the vamp idea doesn't always have to apply strictly to a Latin tune or a contemporary tune or pop tune. It can also be a swing tune. I heard Count Basie play an introduction for Sinatra on Fly Me to the Moon that just was a vamp like this. vamping right on the tonic chord, or the first chord of the song, but vamping and then putting the 5 in there too. So like 1, 5, 1, 5. Also works good on It Had to Be You if you're doing this, like, there's a vamp. You hear how that vamp idea works? It can be just the 1 to the 5, but it's vamping. So that's another idea for the vamp. I want to talk about just a few more introductions that fall into unique categories, but they also utilize things from previous categories. And the first one is a 1-bar introduction that I used on the song The Way You Look Tonight. I used this on my video, and it's in the key of E flat, so the first chord is there. So I used this line that's built on the scale. It starts on 1, it goes right up the scale, right up the E flat scale. But then it goes here, a chromatic approach to the melody note there. So I started on the 6th chord, C minor 7. Then I used these diminished chords as drop 2 voicings, like this. Took me to the B flat 7, or the 5 chord there, and put the pedal tone in there, and then I used this diminished chord against that pedal tone to take me to the E flat, the first chord and note of the measure. So the interesting thing, I guess, is that diminished chord there approaching the E flat. And it's really like an E flat diminished approaching like that. So that happens a lot in music, where you'd have a tonic note, then it's diminished like that kind of thing. The second example now is The Nearness of You in the key of F. And I started it, I used the descending line in the left hand down the scale from A flat, G, and then the C, the 5 there. So like the first chord, rather than being a minor 7, I used an F chord with an A in the bass. Then I went up to a D flat chord with an A flat in the bass, D flat 6 actually, and then a G minor 7 there, and then a C7 with a flat 9 there, like that. So those are 2 unique introductions, and you can look at those carefully on the music that I've downloaded and make available for you on my website. The Way You Look Tonight and The Nearness of You. And there's 2 more that I want to talk about next. A couple more examples that don't fit into a category exactly is on the song When You Wish Upon a Star that I have a tutorial on, I used a diminished chord, like, you think of it as a D diminished if you like, and we're in the key of C, but I used an arpeggiated movement, like kind of an ethereal sound, getting me to this, the G sus chord, then this diminished again. There's the diminished approaching the chord, the G diminished approaching the G chord, like it's actually G7 because there's the 7th, and then we're going to the C there. So I had this ethereal kind of sound for the diminished, and then to that, to the mid, and so on. So that's that one. The other one was on the Christmas song. I used something rather unusual. I wanted to get a certain kind of effect, and it was this E flat, but I'm using that kind of drop 2 idea again, going to a C flat, interesting interval, down a third, and then down a half step, and down a third again, like this. I'm using these drop 2 voicings too, that have a kind of really pretty sound, I think. Down a half step, now down another third again, then down a half step, and then that puts me on the F chord. Then I move it to an F half diminished, which takes me nicely to the B flat sus chord, and then the B flat 7 flat 9, moving me into E flat. So on. So there you have it again. And this is the last one I'm going to do for you. So that's rather unique as an introduction. So that wraps it up. Wrapping up, I just want to say I wanted to address the request that I had to show how to create an introduction. And here I gave you a variety of ways you can do it. They're practical. You can use them in different settings, like whether you're playing solo piano, whether you're backing up a singer, whether you're playing in a trio or a band. You can use these. They'll work on lots of tunes that you can play. And so I hope you learned something from this, and you'll write to me, ask me questions, and I will respond. So thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.